especially as an entrepreneur, I done had to put the clamps on contracts, relationships, partnerships, be like, no, I'm good, and step away. And it feels terrifying and it is empowering. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Fast Forward Podcast. We are closing out our conversation on grief this month. And this one is special for me because your girl turned 40. Your girl is 40 years old. And first of all, let me say this. I am not a person who is sad about aging and stuff. I love getting older. It is such a blessing to me. And I'm going to share why in a little bit because there's a specific reason why. But it does make you reflect. Like in my head, I still feel invigorated and hopeful and excited like I did in my 20s and 30s, to be honest. So the dread that I thought it was possible I might feel, like I'm just not there. I'm not saying it may never come. I hope it doesn't, but I just don't feel that. But I also have a particular burden where it's like, oh, I should be pouring into other people. I need to be mentoring more. I need to be preparing the next generation because I'm closer to old age than I am to young age. Like I'm right in the middle. And so it does cause you to reflect a lot. Today's conversation is going to be about self-evolution grief. And I think this is really important for leaders and entrepreneurs because you do have to grieve all the versions of you that you have been and that you've had to shed to become who you are now. And I think for me, this largely has shaped up because of loss way more so than successful gains. So I started my journey into adulthood processing the impact of sexual assault in high school and my college experience. I know now. At the time, I tried to just completely dismiss it from my mind and just act like it didn't happen. But I can see now the residuals of all of that hurt, pain, disillusionment, confusion, and even the weight of secrecy. Because I refused to really tell anyone. And the couple people I did tell, they just were not receptive at all. And I started to shut down. I also came into adulthood experiencing the profound loss of some really important friendships. So people who I have been close friends with since childhood, those relationships just completely fizzled out. And it was a painful breakup. Like I could not process not being friends. It was one person in particular. It was very difficult for me to reconcile that she just did not want to be my friend anymore. And that left me reeling at a time where I was already quite vulnerable. There was also a lot of loss from a sense of community. So I mentioned, I don't know why this coming up so much this month. It's so interesting about how I was in these like religious groups and the rejection and ridicule that I faced there was just really intense. And then finally, growing up, in an abusive family and having to experience my first taste of freedom to create and define my own life, it was intense. Like it was a hard landing coming into undergrad and also trying to get my life together. So trying to go to school, trying to kick off my career and make sure I'm set to do the things that I've been dreaming about as a child and watching that like flounder and all of that stuff. So while watching that version of me shed was welcome, it was also so hurtful. And I've had to process that several times during adulthood because I kept coming back to how that pain profoundly transformed me and how all of that pain really stunted the growth that I could have experienced. Like there were so many opportunities I had to do things between the ages of 18 and 23. And for all the things that I did do and did manage to accomplish, there were a ton of things that I didn't. And even though I've had the chance to go back and grab some of those, it still hurt, right? Because I failed myself, like just to be honest. And then transitioning into the bulk of my 20s was marked by a lot of loss with like actual loss. So the death of multiple family members just back to back to back. The loss of a sense of community because I relocated and didn't really have anyone to lean on. The financial loss that came from that lack of community. The ways in which grieving over my loved ones passing led me into very toxic and abusive relationships and situations that took years to recover from, right? So it's the compounding impact of just like loss. And so then I get to my 30s and I got to spend time regrouping and trying to rebuild all of these things. When I think of the versions of myself that I've had to be, I am proud, yes, but I've also had to sit with that grief and that hurt a couple times. And I'm so grateful for the therapists that I've had over the years and the places I've lived. And in particular, my last two therapists, so the one I have now and the one that I had when I lived in LA, they have been incredible at helping me to be honest about what I've lost and still be hopeful about what I can still be. And I think I needed that because it's very easy when you're thinking about self-evolution to slip into self-condemnation. You'll be like, why I do that? And I should have done that was dumb. And it's like, yeah, there's space for you to be like, that was a bad choice. Like, I do believe that it's important to be honest. I've talked to y'all about this before. I'm not one of those, it's not a loss, it's a lesson. No, baby, it's both. Like, you lost some stuff, you messed that up. That was not good, but also you can still have another chance at life. But they've helped me to see the value in being honest about those losses. Because I think for a long time, I didn't even want to admit how deep the impact was. I wanted to end this month and spend today speaking on how costly it can be to evolve because it's not pretty. It's often a very ugly process. It requires an incredible amount of resilience, resolve, and self-efficacy. And it hurts real bad. It hurts real, real bad. I think for me, coming into 40, the excitement is that I stuck with the process. And so what I will challenge everyone to accept and recognize is that while yes, the grief of who you have been, who you've had to be, all the ways in which that may not have turned out how you wanted, you still breathing, you still here, you still got a chance to become all these amazing things that you want to do. And so for me right now, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I got so much I could do. Like this about to be, this is gonna be amazing. And from that grief comes a sense of hope. And I'm grateful for that. Real quick, there are three aspects of grief with self-evolution that I want to highlight. The first is for me, and this is through the lens of my own life. So the first is evolving into an orphan. I lost my mother, my stepfather, and my grandmother. So my mother and grandmother passed like 2 weeks apart. And then I lost my stepfather about a year or so later. And at that time, I really didn't have a relationship with my biological father. And then you all know, because I've talked about it on this podcast, he has since passed in the last couple of years. And throughout that whole process, so from 24 to, what was that, like 38? Yeah, like 38. I had already catalyzed the process of learning to be an orphan. Like, what does it look like to have to parent myself? But when my biological father passed, it was like, no, for real. Like, you really genuinely do not have parents anymore. And that evolution has hurt. Like, this is like some serious stuff. Like, I've had to learn what a parent means to me. Right. And this is also compounded by the fact that, like, I just didn't have great parenting experiences to begin with. Like, my parents were terrible parents. They were terrible. And so I'm having to not only reconcile what their terrible parenting did, and thankfully, most of that I did like in my late 20s and 30s. but it's still some level. Like that's the thing where it's like it keeps going. So you never quite arrive with that foolishness. Let me just let y'all know if you're going through that process. I hate to tell y'all that, but it just you never quite get. It's always a new layer of foolishness to process through. But the other part is now that it is like official, that like, nah, girl, like you in this on your own. I have had to be clear about what type of parent I need, and then how do I need to strengthen myself to be that parent now? Like, for real, because you never stop being somebody's child. Well, you could be 80, you still need to be parented. And so, because I have to do that for myself, I'm constantly learning. Like, one of the things that I constantly challenge myself with is when enough is enough. So protection. And some of this will involve you being what you didn't have. So one of the things that I never had growing up was protection. Like anybody could treat me any kind of way. My parents were not coming to be like, no, that's inappropriate. Stop. They would treat me any kind of way. They never said, okay, you know what, enough is enough. You seem kind of tired. You should go to sleep. Like they never stood up for me. They never protected me. And so I've had to learn what protection means for me now. And it's jarring. Like it's a very interesting process to protect yourself without becoming so guarded that you can't build relationships. And so one of the first things, so we think about even like Maslow's needs hierarchy, one of the first things that I've been teaching myself over the past, and it took years to do it, is like, when am I physically tired and drained? And then that led to being like, okay, when am I emotionally tired and drained? And then it was like, okay, when am I intellectually and creatively tired and drained? And I had to kind of go up the list. But even just being like, okay, you sleepy, go to bed. It sounds basic, but that was important for me because when I was a kid, there was no, okay, hey, it's time to go to sleep, da da da. Like, I mean, past maybe 7, 8. Like, I was managing myself. I would be up late into the night doing homework, working on stuff, talking to boys on the phone, just crazy stuff. And I just was not being parented. Thank God I had all of these lofty goals of success, so that kept me in check. But if I hadn't, I mean, I would have been out there easily because I just was not, there was just not adult influence being like, hey, don't do this, do this. Here's structure, here's discipline. That just did not exist. So I've had to teach myself that over the years and not in the context of overworking. So I'm good for being like, I'm tired right now. I'm going to take a nap. And then I get up and I go take a nap. Like, that is revolutionary. Because again, folks was not doing that for me. Parenting for me has also meant setting boundaries with how people are allowed to treat me. So in the past year alone, especially as an entrepreneur, I done had to put the clamps on contracts, relationships, partnerships, all types of stuff and be like, no, I'm good. And step away. And it feels terrifying. I mean, there are times where I go to send an email or write something or schedule a call, and I'm like, because again, I just was not taught that. I was not guided. I was not protected like that. You know, again, I was just wide open and exposed. And so parenting for me has meant, no, enough is enough. You're not going to talk to me like that. You're not going to do this. In fact, let's rework this. I'm going to step away from this. And it is empowering. And then I have to like hold myself while I cry sometimes, do deep breathing while I had a panic attack. But it's like, we going to do this, period. I don't care if you don't like it. So just like if the bully was messing with you as a kid or a teacher was bullying you as a kid and your parent would come stand up and you might be over in the corner crying, but your mama and daddy still going to be like, yeah, nah, nah, nah. I have to do that for myself. Another area where I've had to grieve and reprocess is around friendship. So I was always the kid that just had super suspicious friends. Like now looking back, and it's funny because I got that from my mom. Like my mother had terrible friends, like terrible friends. Like I remember her friends calling her names, disparaging her, talking behind her back to us as kids, being super disrespectful, just nasty. And she'd be like, that's my friend. And my mother's self-esteem was so low that she just accepted that. And I learned early, and I remember she used to tell me all the time, like, you pick friends just like me. Like, she never really trusted my friends as a child, but she wouldn't quite explain why. And then also, she was abusive. So it was like, okay, well, that's the pot calling the kettle, but all right, girl. But the point is like, you know, it was just bad. It was just a bad situation, just all around. It was just really bad. I realize now that a lot of it was informed by her unwillingness to set appropriate boundaries with people, her low self esteem to where she didn't believe she was worth being loved and cared for and appreciated, her unwillingness to take risks and put herself in environments where she could experience mutual love. In some cases, the relationships that did offer her mutual love and benefit, she would shun those. And I've seen that in myself. So there are like 4 or 5 friends over the years, like even going back to being a teenager and no, I'm sorry, childhood, where that was a really good friendship. And I would just be drawn toward the people who would just treat me dirty. And I refute. And it was like those people constantly were reaching out to build connect. I mean, it could have been amazing friendships that would have lasted, I'm sure, a lifetime. And I just would not show up in the way that I would show up for these other toxic, trifling friendships. And I grieve that. Like, there are times where I'm like, man, that person was so good to me, or like, wow, I used to really enjoy that person. And so grieving the evolution of being a person who was just staunchly drawn to terrible friendships to now being like, no, I want to be intentional about building connection with people who I know are for me, and teaching myself how to do that, and teaching myself that I deserve that, and teaching myself that it's okay to have that, teaching myself to process through the loss of lifelong friendships that I didn't cultivate, because eventually those people just stopped talking to me and wouldn't reconnect. And let me say this publicly, I am not mad at them. If you one of the people and you end up seeing this episode, please do not think I'm saying this because I'm mad at you, because I'm not. You should have cut me off. That was absolutely the appropriate response to you not getting back what you put in. And I love that for you. I'm happy that you set that boundary. And I wish you the absolute best still to this day. And I'm sure they're going to know who they are when they hear this. But it hurt because I'm like, dang, that would have been an amazing friendship. But it is what it is, right? And I would not put pressure on them to try to reconcile, because I don't like when people put pressure on me to reconcile. I blew it. It is what it is. Oh, well, like, do better next time. You know what I'm saying? But there's grief still about having to evolve past being that person and what that loss has meant for me, period, in life. Thirdly, grieving who I've evolved out of being professionally. One of the biggest lessons that I've had to teach myself over the past couple of years of full-time entrepreneurship is growing out of being an employee. And I talked about this in my Canvas Rebel interview. And I realized that I was so used to being beaten down, taken advantage of, manipulated, again, as a reflection of my circumstances growing up, that the freedom that entrepreneurship provides, just even intellectual and creative freedom, I had to teach myself to appreciate that. Teaching myself to appreciate that has meant that I don't shoot down my ideas before I have a chance to even fully think through them. So I was so used to, I could be at work, say something, it could be in a team meeting. No, we don't like that. That's stupid. Da, da, da. And I'd be like, okay, not say nothing. And then days, weeks, months later, all of a sudden the supervisor in a meeting that I don't get to be in because it's with their higher ups, they taking that same idea and just running with it. And I'm like, well, why you do that? But I had to realize, like, no, they did that to play you and make you insecure on purpose. Not knowing that the cost of that is that it battered my self-esteem. So it chips away at all of the pieces of your creativity. And so the past couple of years has been me reclaiming so much of that, like reclaiming my capacity to dream, reclaiming my capacity to ideate freely without limitations, reclaiming my capacity to love freely. And by love, I mean to love the way that I do my work. Like, I work in a particular way. There is a way that I do things, and I love it. I love my pace of working. I love my style of working. I love my thought process. I really appreciate it. I think it adds so much value. And getting to the point where I could get away from foolishness and toxicity to continue to love on that part of me has been an incredible journey. And I don't want to give that up. I don't want to get it. I don't want to lose that again. Because I have years of experience where you fight through just to exist. And believe me, my resume looks damn good. Love that for me. But I never want to go back to where I'm fighting just to be hurt. I have way too much freedom in my business. Whether or not it ends up being the 6-figure, 7-figure idea, whatever, I just love being able to come up with stuff. And I've been able to build and scale ideas and concepts and things over the years just because I have that freedom. I don't ever in my life want to go back to the days where I did not have that freedom. I do not want that. And I've had to learn to grieve all the versions of myself that didn't get to have that and didn't get to just be. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times where I could be at work, especially working in the office, and people just needle at you. And that had such a profound impact even on my physical health. Like, I remember when we first got the shelter in place orders, and I was wondering, like, why am I having such an impact? It was like I was restless, and I realized that I was so used to being disturbed and just like needled at that my brain and my body couldn't even process being able to just sit someplace and just work. And I couldn't believe how productive I was. I mean, I could get stuff done. And I remember thinking, and I'm like, I don't never want to go back to anybody's office. Like, I never, ever, ever want to go back into an office again. And thankfully, I have not. And now that I work for myself, like, I never have to think about that. And grieving what that early career version of me lost through all of that foolishness has been such a pivotal experience for me as an entrepreneur because I feel like I'm able to manage better. I'm able to create more effectively. I'm able to appreciate the growth of my business, so the incremental growth and change of my company, because I'm not constantly comparing myself to that battered version of professional me. So, those are some of my biggest areas of that self-evolution grief. It could look totally different from you. I talked about the romantic part, but that, of course, has been a part of it too. Learning to appreciate the type of woman I am and how that will show up in romantic relationships. It feels really good to start to build connection with people who appreciate this version of me and who I am and how I navigate the world, but also to tell people, hey, you know what? This is not really a fit. That feels really good too. And I don't feel like I had that power in younger years, in my 20s, in my 30s. It took a long time to build that muscle, but it's necessary. It is. It's totally necessary. So tell me, what does self-evolution grief look like for you? And out of the episodes, we talked about career grief. I'm looking at my notebook. Career grief, romantic grief, spiritual grief, and self-evolution grief. Which do you think is most important for you right now to navigate through? And which do you think is most difficult? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I will catch y'all in the next one. Bye.